All right, everybody, we're going to get started. I want to welcome everyone to a special online seminar colloquia party called Generative AI, Critical Thinking and Wonder in the 21st Century. And we're here to explore the intersections of these ideas. AGLSP is the Association of Graduate Liberal Studies Programs, and our member students, professors, faculty, and staff are committed to living at the nexus of technology, history, philosophy, and knowledge. And I'm just really excited to be hosting today. My name is Bill Nericcio, and I'm the director of the panelists program at San Diego State University. And I also get to be the president of AGLSP. And I'm really happy to be here. I want to thank all of the staff at AGLSP at Rice University, Rebecca and Kim Raptis, and I want to thank especially Amy Dancer on the board of directors of AGLSP for helping to organize this event. Today, we get to welcome three amazing speakers, experts in and around the fields of AI. We've got James DeMarco, Amanda Starling Gould, and Nicol Turner-Lee, and I'll be saying a little bit more about them in a few minutes as I introduce them and we start our conversation. Okay, so I'm going to share screen just for a second. So this is today's event, exploring the intersection, generative AI, critical thinking, and wonder. A little bit more about AGLSP. We're a professional organization of academic programs providing graduate interdisciplinary education in the liberal arts and sciences. The cool thing about AGLSP is that our member programs are all over the country, Canada, and we're committed to next generation versions of liberal studies, old school liberal studies, but also next generation. And I want to take just 1 second. I promise this is my only ad of the day. I want to let everyone who is here for today's event know that this is just the warm-up for our annual conference, AIGLSP, putting the I in AI in the age of digital culture. And that's going to be an online Zoom-based extravaganza, and it's dropping Thursday, October 10th. Information for this event is available for you at aglsp.org. And I want to invite all of you to take part in that. Okay. So I wanted to start with my little friend here, my little AI friend who's going to be helping me with today's event. I have been called the Gallagher of literature professors, so I've been known to have props. Okay, I'm going to put this guy right here behind me in my Laredo t-shirt. And I want to go to our introductions. Now, our introductions are going to be I want you to meet the 3 billion people that we brought today, but I wasn't happy with their bios. You know how we have professional professors, writers, academics, researchers, and they've got amazing bios, but I thought I would ask our friends, AIs, to rewrite their bios just to test how good they were. And so what I'm going to do is introduce, so that you can get to know our three speakers. I'm going to introduce each of them and let them say a little bit here at the outset about their work, where they stand with regard to artificial intelligence, what their contributions are, what their questions are, and what their issues are. So I'm going to begin with Amanda Starling Gould. And Amanda's bio was rewritten by ChatGPT, but I gave it a special prompt. Okay, I want to see how smart these AIs are. So I asked ChatGPT to rewrite Amanda's bio in the style of Gore Vidal, the late great Gore Vidal. So this is This is Chat GPT giving it a go. Amanda Starling Gould deftly navigates the treacherous waters of technology and ethics, leading the Partnership for Public Services Responsible AI Initiative. At Duke University, she exposes the myths of AI's benevolence in her incisive courses on technology's future. I kind of liked it. Her research, a potent mix of media philosophy and environmental humanities, reveals the insidious biases lurking in our digital systems. Gould's work is a clarion call for equity, challenging the power structures that shape our tech-dominated world. As she scrutinizes advanced generative AI and AI assistance, Gould relentlessly pursues a future where technology serves humanity, not the other way around. Amanda, the floor is yours. Could you tell us a little bit about your work, not in the voice of Chat GPT aping Gorvidon?
I already want to go on a sidebar to think about. We'll circle back around to that, but the idea that you took what I wrote, put it into a machine, read it in your voice in a videotaped conversation. And so if someone were to drop into the conversation without having heard the bit about the ChatGPT prompt, they would either think I had overloaded my own bio, or that you had, and then this persists in this recorded manner. But I'll say a little bit about where I might how I might present myself, and we can talk about the other things as we continue on. So I do indeed wear two different hats. So one, my day job is I lead a enterprise-wide initiative at the Partnership for Public Service that in various ways serves the US federal government in its use and regulation of AI. And I also have just finished writing our internal AI policy, so how staff might be able to use AI and how I might and our organization might be able to support staff as they start using AI. And I've also then been spending some of my day testing the various generative AI tools to see how they might be used to support the staff experience and or provide value to our customers and constituents. The other hat that I wear that is sometimes complementary, sometimes contradictory, and sometimes just completely incommensurate is that I get to teach classes at Duke for the Graduate Liberal Studies program led by Dr. Visnath, who's in the room, and have a lot of fun doing that. The class that I'm teaching and developing for the fall is called AI and the Future of Human History. And we're really thinking there about how to read AI as a text, how to read its output as a text, and more importantly, how to think about how we interact with it and it interacts with the world, and how generative AI is a relational infrastructure, and how all of that changes the way that we move through the world and interact with each other. And so it makes for interesting days sometimes when those are put into conversation with each other, my two jobs. And yet I think they really kind of both make the other stronger. The other thing that we're doing for the Graduate Liberal Studies program this fall is part of my research was looking at generative AI assistants and how they become potentially actors in the world. And so Anne and I got a grant to hire some graduate students to be human AI assistants. And we're pulling together a generative AI lab for the class that we will then sort of package and ship as a model that could be used in other humanities courses around generative AI. So we are the class, I think, and I'll share just a bit about it, and then we pass it on. I definitely want us to be able to move through our questions. Is one of the things that is very important to me is that we talk about the the ways that generative AI is showing up in the world. And I do not think that my students need to be experts on generative AI to be able to see and observe how it is at work in the world. And I also think that in my particular experience, the more that I started using them and learning about them and making them and testing all the different tools, the more that I understood what could be done and couldn't be done, and what they might mean to us in the world. So I'm designing a class so that students can either do a track where they're learning hands-on about generative AI, and another, if they come to the class with a commitment not to participate in exploitation and environmental impact.
Is it in a bag?
They can still think about generative AI in critical ways without having kind of hands-on.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. My next introduction is for James DeMarco. Jim, this was written by Meta AI mimicking Virginia Woolf, no less. James DeMarco's trajectory unfurls like a river's gentle flow, weaving together threads of innovation and insight. With a quarter century's worth of experience, he navigates the realms of digital transformation, guiding Microsoft's esteemed clients through the labyrinth of change. A masterful storyteller, Jim has initiated hundreds of Microsoft's finest into the art of design-led thinking, kindling a fire of customer engagement. His odyssey has traversed the expanse of telecommunications, where he pioneered the use of real-time decision-making, leaving an indelible mark. A lawyer, strategist, and sage, Jim's intellect has been honed by the esteemed institutions of Northwestern and Notre Dame. Jim, take it away.
I don't know which to respond to, the gentle trajectory of my career, which I'm sure, because I had to fund paying kids' college tuitions, that I would agree with was a gentle trajectory relative to need. Or I'm kind of reminded of what happened. So when I was an undergrad, I studied theology, and I had to study Karl Rahner, who a famous German theologian, who was also famous for one little thing. He had students translate, his works were so hard to understand. His students would actually take his work and have it translated from the natural German into French and then back into German so that they could understand what the heck their professor was talking about. At one point, one student presented the retranslated back into German Karl Rahner works, and Rahner said, "Boy, this guy said it better than I could." And I kind of think this may be part of where we're seeing our lives in AI as well. AI is really good at guessing what it already knows and translating it into sort of other ways of looking at that same thing. We'll talk about that, I suppose, in more detail. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I wear two hats in this conversation. For me, academics is my night job. My day job, I actually work with AI every day. And I have the privilege of working with some people who build it. I work at Microsoft. We're pretty steeped in AI. I'm grateful that you chose the two products that had nothing to do with Microsoft for the other two speakers, and the one that had nothing to do with Microsoft for me. I appreciate that. But I have the privilege also of working with people on what are the practical uses and what are the guardrails we need to put in place around the use of AI. And in the academic space, wearing that other hat, I have, because I teach digital transformation and enterprise architecture in a master's program for people who are CIOs in training. It is for me the opportunity and privilege to sort of look at what we can do and what we should do and what we should not do with the use of technology, including the responsible use of architecture. So I feel really privileged to be with these incredibly bright people here in this conversation. I'm glad I'm able to bring sort of a bit of a more meat and potatoes to the much loftier meal that everybody here is about to consume. So,
thank you, Jim. The last intro, and I'm sad that I can't read all of it because Microsoft Copilot refused to cut Nicole Turner-Lee's bio down to 100 words. So Nicole, Microsoft likes you. Copilot likes you. But I asked Microsoft Copilot to write Nicole Turner Lee's bio. This was via the Bing implementation, but I asked it to channel Stephen King in writing your bio. And I have to say, if this was my literature student, I think I'd give it an A+. Here's a taste. In the dim glow of cyberspace, Nicole Turner Lee emerged, a shadowy figure navigating the tangled web of governance and innovation. Her mission? To bridge the digital chasm that yawned wide across the land. The Center for Technology Innovation, CTI, was her sanctuary, its corridors echoing with the hum of servers and the whispers of algorithms. But this was no ordinary quest. Turner Lee's sword was policy, her shield the weighty tome of research. She delved into the heart of the digital divide where the haves and have-nots clashed in pixelated battle. Her fingers danced across keyboards, unearthing stories of the forgotten, those left behind by progress, their voices lost in the static of zeros and ones. Oh my God, this is really beautiful. As the digital revolution swept through America, Turner Lee's words echoed like a warning. Beware the darkness that seeps through the fiber optic veins. Her book, Digitally Invisible, How the Internet Creates the New Underclass, the title echoes like a distant scream. She weaves narratives of struggle and resilience, painting a canvas of fractured connection. Nicole Turner Lee.
So I think I should start with my British accent. That is very good because I feel like I have been portrayed as if I was in the House of Dragon, which is something that I watch pretty regularly as a person who is very interested in that kind of genre. So yeah, that's really interesting. And I sound interesting, and I'm really not that interesting in terms of generative AI from the standpoint that I can actually explain it without all of the words. I'm Nicole Turner Lee. I just actually put the cover of my book in the chat. I can't multitask. I'll put a link to where you can find it. I'm excited to be here for a couple of reasons. I'm a Northwestern alum. And as many of my colleagues actually suggested, I'm actually not a computer scientist, but I'm a sociologist. I'm a social scientist. And so what's so interesting when I actually hear that description of myself, it does two things. It makes me kind of, imaginative in terms of what the generative AI can actually construct about people. At the same time, it makes me fearful because what the generative AI constructs about people is not often the truth. And in some instances, is not always culturally sound. So I find it very interesting that if you were to read this and you didn't actually know who I was, you might not have thought I was a woman, or you might not have thought I was African-American, just simply because the way in which these technologies process themselves. So at Brookings, and I'll do a quick plug of my book after to tell you what it's about. At Brookings, the work that I do focuses on regulatory and legislative policy. As a PhD in sociology, I'd like to say in Washington, D.C., I'm one of the few people who is not an attorney. And so I'm able to bring a sociological perspective that represents people and communities in ways in which they're impacted by these new technologies. And generative AI today is just an extension of the artificial intelligence models that we've seen, whether it was predictive machine learning models, deep neural network models, a combination of both. And now we see generative. And we really are not often scratching the surface as to the extraction of generative AI when it comes to voice, when it comes to face, image, and emotion. You think that's scary in terms of what generative AI did, for example, with my bio? Try having a 17-year-old who asked you the other day, hey, mom, say hi. And then you actually have a whole conversation you didn't have, but it's your voice. That is sort of the fear of which we're going against today. And she told me to not give that example because she actually likes this technology. I think it's called voice AI or character AI, because she gets to play around with it as a 17-year-old. But what she doesn't understand is that so do bad actors who are manipulating elections and finding ways to steal people's personal identity and credit because they're able to use the technology with such precision that it's even scarier than what we actually know. This is actually a part of my book that is sort of towards the end. It's actually what I think is going to be my second book, which is how is technology in many respects playing not just a significant role in our increasingly robust society, so this is what the book is about, but in what ways is it making invisible people? And I spent a lot of the time in the book reflecting on my experiences while I was actually a graduate student in Chicago, working in the very early stages of what was then considered the Community Technology Center movement. John McKnight was my mentor, if you know John McKnight out of his organizing past. He did not believe that technology would be a catalyst for change, but over time we realized that jobs were migrating online and educational resources were online. And people who did not have access, and at that time, I'm going to date myself too, we weren't talking about the access of what we're doing today. We were talking about 386 computers and telephone modems and that screeching sound that connected you to America Online. You all know what I'm talking about there? We're not talking about the technology where the computing power has become so advanced and AI is actually now driving that computing consumption. So the book really starts with this conversation of digital divide as it morphed into digital invisibility. And as a sociologist, the people who are invisible today, just to give you a little bit that might make you want to buy this book, are not just people of color, but they're farmers that I visited in places like Starling, Virginia and Garrett County, Maryland. They are students who before the pandemic were sitting in the parking lot of Taco Bell and McDonald's because they didn't have access before the pandemic. The pandemic just actually amplified it. They are a woman I met in Phoenix who was checking on her health status because she had stage 4 breast cancer. She did not have a computer at home, and she had to go to the public library to actually engage her doctor in that manner. As we have this conversation today, I'd like to just put a point in this, Bill. You can't leapfrog into AI with such effectiveness if you don't deal with digitally invisible people. Because the expectations that we're seeing with new and existing emerging technologies are going to be those that actually integrate themselves into everyday life. Meaning, my 17-year-old is not going to be the only person using the extraction of my voice for verification. Perhaps that verification in generative AI might actually confirm my identity from my bank account. But if I don't have access and I don't have infrastructure to do those things, you might as well count me out, right? Because I will never imagine the way in which technology will interact with my everyday experiences. So the book is really about a path forward and what it's going to take for us to get this right, but most importantly, get it right because the future of our competitiveness relies upon this. So I'm going to find this conversation interesting. Like Amanda, I have a lot to say on generative AI. I will wait for the question on that. But thank you, everybody, for joining and looking forward to a non-generative AI-inspired dialogue for the remaining few moments.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to turn to our first question. Within the hallowed halls of the ivory tower, AI is often a word you hear accompanied with a lot of fear. Professors just at wit's end about how they're going to profess, how they're going to be academics in this brave new world. So I didn't want to begin our conversation though with a Debbie Downer. I play with AI almost every day, every other day. I find it. I'm totally cognizant of the. I'm aware of the manipulations that I'm subject to, but I also have to admit that I like playing with the thing. So the first question is, how might the rise of generative AI reshape our understanding of creativity in the humanities or in the sciences, humanities and the sciences? And what dangers does it pose to the sanctity of original thought and artistic authenticity? And I'll leave the floor open to any of our three speakers who wants to jump in.
I mean, I can jump in. I'm actually working on a paper about this right now, which is focused on the music industry, and in particular, it's focused on in this particular interest I'm looking at Black music and the genre of Black music under generative AI. So in this instance, I'm focusing the work there. it's applicable, I think, to any independent or diverse artist who is actually out there in this age where there is a technology that, in many respects, like you said, Bill, it can potentially, in my interviews, we're finding out, particularly for independent young artists, it is enticing to use these technologies to be able to do things in the music industry, for example, that took months and years for people to do, which is to mix different samples or find the nice cut or figure out what people are listening to or be able to lay those tracks. I go back to, and again, I'm dating myself. I grew up in a household where my father completely loved Marvin Gaye, the artist. And one of the things that Marvin Gaye did that people didn't realize, which is why his sound was so robust, he literally manually oversampled himself on several tracks to be able to fill out the sound. You fast forward today, a lot of folks don't have to do that. I have two artistic kids. They both play instruments. They both sing. They both have all the technology. They sit in their bedrooms in their new studios. But the challenge is we have a technology that has a conflation between efficiency and co-optation. And that's where I think it gets to your point about how do you have a technology that in many respects is interesting to use, poses great efficiencies, inspires creativity, but at the same time, it's engaging in erasure, copyright violation, co-optation, cultural appropriation, all at the same time, simply because it does not attribute where some of those things are coming from. And in many respects, when I'm finding my paper on the music side and what I have found as an author myself, talking to authors, and we just recently at Brookings did something with journalists, it devalues the effort and time that is spent in creating an original piece of work. I can just tell you my book, it took me 4 years. And I tell people all the time, please do not run this through generative AI and have it come out as something synergistic that I am saying my 4 years just became one paragraph because of technology. So I would just sort of put it there. I think that there's a balance that has to be struck between how you maintain this humanistic, humanities-focused, creative-focused perspective. But we all have to be really realistic that that's not the intent or the type of empathy in which this technology is designed. And so I'll leave it there for my colleagues to sort of chime in. But that I kind of sit in that space that this is not a technology that is, in many respects, designed to respect the humanities.
Yeah, it's not good at footnoting. It's like a bad freshman, you know,
Right.
not attribute, not doing the proper attribution. All right.
Exactly.
Jim or Amanda, do you want to jump in?
Perhaps I will, and you can ask it to. It's just not very good at it, and I think that's actually a good point that you bring up, Nicole. The tech doesn't know what it's doing. Generative AI is designed entirely to just guess what's the next word in a sentence, what's the next letter in a word, what's the next phrase in a paragraph. It is an enabling tool. Nicole, you and I are of a similar age. I think I might be a teensy bit earlier because I remember when I was headed to uni, the biggest challenge with music was studio time. Because if you wanted to write something, you needed to have access to a piano, you needed to have access to instruments and so forth. And then Zach, the guy 2 doors down the hall from me, brought his Mac to school. And oh my God, because he had a little program where he could compose music. And suddenly he was able to do an awful lot more. And Mike, these are literally guys' names, I'm not going to get their last names, who lived across the hall from me as an engineer for 3M for like 40 years. But he was a guitarist, and he actually was borrowing Zach's thing because he now had access to go make his own music. And so in many respects, this is the next generation of that. It's the ability for us to sample and understand these things. What it's bad at now, though, is still this construct of it doesn't know what it's doing any more than the Mac knew that if you hit the right combination of J and I at the same time on the keyboard, it gave you the F sharp 1 above C. And I think that's part of the story. Circling it back, though, and to keep on Nicole, on your music analogy, if I can, musicians have always drawn on the inspiration of others. Co-opting or taking, Mozart co-opted everybody, right? Beethoven took a lot from others. Brahms, my favorite is Brahms' Academic Festival Orchestra, something that, you know, we in the academic world, that's a bunch of German drinking songs that he just put together over the course of a week in order to push it out to somebody. It's one of the best pieces of music I know. And that construct is that we're using what was before and sort of, to say, stand on the shoulders of those who were before us. What AI seems to be able to do is give us the ability to do that. What we haven't figured out is the social construct we need to put around it about what's right and wrong. And I think if we want to look at the impact on creativity, or the impact on authenticity, or the impact on cultural co-optation, I think we're going to find ourselves in the spot where we're standing at understanding tech is just tech. It just lets me do more stuff I couldn't do before. We're going to have the ability to create the framework around what we do. And I don't think any of us are there yet. Amanda, I'll throw it over to you because I guess you're the ethicist of the team. So let's, you know, as a kind of, not that Nicol or I don't have background in that, but just, you know, according to ChatGPT, you're like,
right. I'm in Game of Thrones. That's basically why.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say I don't. So the question, you know, what dangers does it pose to the sanctity of original thought and artistic authenticity? I don't mind the sanctity of original thought and artistic authenticity being challenged, because often historically that was gendered, that was raised, that was seated in positions of power. And so if we have a tool that is allowing us to question the output it's giving us and reflect back on what that means about the kind of things that we have archived in the past, and the kind of decisions we made about what was original thought and what counted as expertise and what got to be stored and remembered, I don't really mind that. I think that there's a practice there that is worth thinking about. Authenticity, again, you know, very much to what Jen said, all of my work calls on those who have come before, and that in itself is also, again, kind of gendered and raced and seated in this, like, what counts as authentic, and who gets to count that, and how many things have been stolen and claimed as authentic in the past. And to me, the tools are Judith Butler's recent book about pandemic phenomenology for all things. I'm going to invoke this because she says something in there about how the pandemic made it clear things that were already clear. So we have always breathed in each other, and yet the pandemic made it very visceral. And so some of what I'm introducing to my students and provoking them with is, what is this showing us that has always been the case already? And how is it a creative and interesting thing to think with as a tool? Also, how interesting is it to watch how people are using it, and the stories they are using to sell it, and the rhetoric being used to promote it, that then causes us to be very confused about what it actually does. And what I am seeing in my day job, and why I'm really excited that you brought us here together, is that it is those without an interdisciplinary background and a very myopic view of the world who are causing many of the problems, and who are proposing solutions that are entirely problematic. I'll stop there because I could just keep going.
I know, right? This is one of those, once you start, you can't stop.
And
I know, right?
Just thinking as you were talking that I mean, AI is a kind of imitation machine. I mean, I can use some older world terms, but to mix metaphors and mix theories, they're imitation machines with repetition compulsions. That is their tendency, or at least in my experience working with them, is to repeat things in patterns that, you know, that push us into the terrain of danger, right? And bad actors using these machines to intervene in ways that are criminal or or pathological, but I don't want, that's my own interest in AI. And I actually want to ask, I want to move to our the questions that good old chat helped me to author. So the next question is, in what ways can the insights of the humanities uh, and and of course I have to confess, I'm actually one of those professors in the humanities. I'm an English professor who runs an interdisciplinary studies program, but most of my publications now are on film and television. Um, Most of my older colleagues, and I've been a professor now 35 years, so I'm getting on, um, dating myself. Uh, they're quite fearful of the consequences of these machines and these evolutions in machine learning in the 21st century, and how these breakthroughs coincide with visceral, demonstrated, planned and strategic attacks on the humanities in American universities and international universities. So this question, that's a long preamble to asking, in what ways can the insights of the humanities shape the ethical contours of AI development, ensuring these technologies remain tethered to human values?
So I'll jump in, and I kind of want to go back to Amanda's previous comment around the curation of content that comes in more generative systems, because I want us to continue to sort of push the envelope that generative AI, as it's been really clearly explained to me, which I've used for the last few months, is really like having eyes in the back of your head. It's actually picking up on information that's already available in many respects on the internet through large language modeling. Whereas predictive machine learning AI allows for the type of repetition that can often get the prediction right. So I talk to a lot of lay people, so I try to make sure people are clear that in many respects, generative AI is really a big problem because it scrapes the existing information. It in many respects sort of molds the insights, but more importantly, as a person whose work, like myself, intersects race, technology, and social justice, it reinforces the trauma of data. And it allows that trauma of data to show up in ways in which it does not contribute towards the healing of humanity. In many respects, it feeds misinformation, disinformation, poor outcomes when it comes to the use of AI or generative AI when in healthcare. It robs people of their opportunity to have protection in their jobs with AI chatbots who also tend to come in and take away the empathy and the trust that an actual human being has, as a provider. I've seen many, many cases right now of, nurses that are now AI assisted. And, where to your question, Bill, I think we have to get everybody on the same page, this is not, as I call it in the book with the digital divide, is not my grandma's digital divide. This is not my grandma or my generation's technology access. This is a technology that in many respects can really perpetuate the type of systemic inequalities, harm, and weaponize insights in ways that can disenfranchise people. So to your point, where do the humanities come into play? I have this chart, I wish I could have showed, which sort of shows in an ideal world, humanities would co-evolve and co-develop with groups. We're working on right now at the Brookings Institution, my center has what's called an AI Equity Lab, which is working on interdisciplinary models where we're workshopping critical high-risk applications of AI, from journalism to criminal justice to healthcare. And guess what? The technologists are not leading these conversations. It's the expert groups that come from either the practice, the industry, the academia that are actually leading these discussions. I'm so excited about it because it changes the nature of the approach this. The question you're asking is quite difficult because the humanities are not often invited to the table. So I think you have to start with the structural reality that we're not training humanities students as computer scientists, nor are we training computer scientists with some type of social science or humanity background. So we're failing right there because the technology is being built by people who don't necessarily have that same type of empathy and care. One of the longest papers I've ever written at Brookings was with an engineer. If you ever think about what a situation looks like between a sociologist, an engineer, and a lawyer, the lawyer does okay because they basically mediate the conflict between a sociologist and a computer scientist. Seriously, like, whereas my friend kept telling me math is discrete, science is discrete, I kept saying, no, it's not. There are structural constraints. My point is, that paper was the longest paper, was the hardest paper, but is the best paper, because we don't necessarily teach each discipline how to see the perspective, how to come in with their values and ways. So I love your question. I've not been able to figure out how. Many of my humanities friends and students that come through Brookings, I get a lot of linguistic people now, Amanda and Jim, a lot of linguistic majors, but I haven't been able to see the room, the seat that they're given at the tables among the people who are developing the technologies. I can't get Black people at the table and women at the table. I'm trying to get more people with LGBT backgrounds who have participatory references for how to do this stuff better. But we still, as a community, and many of us on this call, have not figured out how to pull a seat up to the table of developers who basically are monopolizing and dominating the design conversations. So I'll stop there. My colleagues may have more. I've not been able to figure out how you change the way in which the monopolizers are more inviting to participatory approaches that require, to your point, some level of folks that deal in these spaces at an equal playing field.
Thank you. Thank you. Amanda?
I mean, I think one way into that potentially is to, in your question, how do we ensure these technologies remain tethered to human values? They are very tethered to human values. They are tethered to profit, competition, innovation, efficiency, coolness. They are very tethered to human values. They're not tethered to the ones that I would want them to be tethered to. But if we don't recognize that, in part, and I will pass to Jim because I know that you're at Microsoft. I mean, that's like part of that's. These things are products. They're products that are being sold to us. They're consumer products, right? And so if we forget about that because we're focused on like the cute little cool things it can do by doing poems or doing things in other people's voices, I really think that part of the early demonstrations of ChatGPT used poetry because it made it really innocuous. It was cute. Something cute can also be dangerous. And so it really, it started the rhetoric around, these are fun, you can play with them, right? These are cute, they do all these little things that we didn't think it would do. This is like, oh my gosh, it's the little pet that we can look at and it does cute things. And it allows us to disremember, ignore, erase that it is connected to profit, innovation, efficiency, competition, coolness, that kind of technology, that's, and they're extremely seductive. Once you get it to do a thing, you're like, I got it to do a thing. I made my own GPT. They're very seductive in this kind of like wrapped up in, I did this cool thing and I want to make it do more and I want to see what I can do. And again, I'll go back to what I said earlier, that so many of the problems that I am seeing, and I was in a workshop this week and I really wanted to unmute and yell, stop. It would have been wildly inappropriate to do so, but it was folks who were suggesting to other folks who knew less than them about what the tools do, that they do this particular thing about creating agents. And I was like, no, we need to stop that. That's not how it works. That's potentially very dangerous. And yet it's quite easy to do something that looks quite impressive without actually knowing how they work. And then you do the thing that looks impressive and you convince others that you've done something very impressive, convince them to do the same. And it now becomes divorced from its particular context of harm or how it was built or how it is indeed like this relational infrastructure, and increasingly. But yeah, I think it's deeply steeped in human values.
Jim?
I'm not quite sure whether to answer this as Jim who works for Microsoft, Jim who works for Northwestern, or Jim who's just a smartass who doesn't necessarily know as much as he thinks he knows. Let's go with the third one. So I think we're in agreement on certain things here. One is that the use of any technology can be both good and bad. Technology is a tool. Artificial intelligence is a tool. It is an incredibly, vastly powerful tool. It's more powerful than the people who built it know what it can do. That said, every tool can be a weapon. The tank started as a tractor, right? We can argue the tractor probably had a fairly influential positive impact on society and hunger. But then it became the tank and it changed warfare the way we know it. Artificial intelligence is in that same vein, something that could be used for good or for ill. I spend most of my day job actually talking about how we can use AI to do things like bridge the divide on healthcare by enabling remote healthcare or things like that. There are positive uses of this stuff. It does have to have the appropriate guardrails. And now let me see if I can circle it back to the role that humanities plays in all of this. Because from my perspective, we do need to agree there are sets of values that we need to ground the use and the definition of artificial intelligence in. And Amanda, I'm afraid that I may have a little bit too much of a Pollyannish view of this, because where I come from, the values that we actually espouse are the values of, in fact, things like fairness, reliability, privacy, inclusiveness, accountability, and transparency. Those are values that are both Eastern and Western values. Those are values that cut across cultural constructs. They are values that it's easy for somebody in tech to say, hey, these are my values, but I'm also a profit maker. And therefore, we can undercut ourselves as we execute on that, which means to say, you can't just rely on the tech companies to hold those values. I also think it would be a bit arrogant for us to say that the academic world is the only place where those values should be determined. And I think it's fair to say that religion, which has typically been the arbiter of decency for the last, couple thousand years, has a role, but may not necessarily have the only role in determining what those values are. But at some point, every one of us, I think, agree that we have to have the guardrails. I don't think we throw the baby out with the bathwater. Humanities is the one place where we actually ask, what are the genuine guardrails we have? So in the Office of Responsible AI at my day job employer, it's run by a bunch of humanities folks. The head of it's a lawyer. And the person with whom I interface with was a Brit Lit major. But the fact is that if we don't create that model that says I can think outside my own framework, then we're only going to be making decisions within our own framework, and we'll screw it up if we're not careful. And that's where humanities actually challenges our framework itself.
But can I add to that for just a moment, though? I do think, to your point, there is a leaning into the values of tech companies who are developing and instituting these products. And I love your tractor analogy, because I actually use a tractor analogy in the book. I write a chapter on there's more cows than people when I'm talking about rural infrastructure and the access that people have. And I use a quote from a man that I met who said, we would love to we have farmers who go out and buy $1 million tractors that are broadband enabled, that can actually go in and clear a whole, acreage of land. But without broadband, they're still tractors.
I worked with the people on the Farm Beats initiative.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
AI is the same way. I think AI is the same way, right? We can create these impressions of a technology that has, to your point, huge efficiencies, and I'll stay in the healthcare space. But if the data that is training the model is not necessarily representative of various populations, because the clinical trials outside of the application are lacking, then we basically created a healthcare AI that's not going to be applicable to a good portion of people with sickle cell disease or people who have MDS, because the technology is only as good as the inclusiveness of the data. And I think, to your point, the values that I think many people, and I sit in Washington, D.C., are looking for, and this, Jim, as Amanda, is what is the threshold of equity and inclusiveness and responsibility and ethics that we need to start with. And that's when I brought up my point. The unfortunate thing is the right people, and this is what Amanda was saying, they're not at the table. That conversation does not start until the technology is basically deployed and someone has gotten hurt. Give you another good example, facial recognition technology. Microsoft came out really early and said, this is no good, but yet the city of Detroit still uses it. And the last person that got pinged by the technology was an 8-month pregnant Black woman in Detroit who was misidentified as committing a robbery just an hour before the people came to her house, arrested her in front of her children, and took her to the station, and she almost lost her child. My point is, we cannot allow the technology to come out of the gate without really having a interdisciplinary, all hands on deck conversation around the things that matter to human people and humanity in general. And that's why I love this question, because how we bring more folks to the table to help us in the framing before the cat gets out the bag is going to be pretty significant to the consequences that in some cases can never be retracted or remediated because a person has already experienced the harm. So, I mean, that's the space I live in. I'm like, you know, if there's not enough people at the table who can convince me that this is safe to deploy on human subjects in ways that does not critically impair their ability to remain democratically free or feel like a human in this society with this technology, we need to go back and figure out who's at the table. Because, you know, they're not represented.
And Amanda, I don't want to jump on a line on you here, but so at the risk of completely agreeing with you, there are a few things. I think what we're seeing here, and this is because this is a fundamental shift in technology. This is a fundamental shift in our economic paradigm that we're seeing because of this technology. That means we have to reset the rules of what we mean by decent.
Yes.
And we haven't gotten there. And we're not paying enough attention to that. There was a fantastic, I think it was David Brooks said it at one point about, don't quote me, and if Mr. Brooks didn't say it, I apologize to him. It said at one point, the only people who were responsible for making decisions about what was good, right, and decent was the United States Supreme Court. And well, there's a terrible place to put that burden. And, you know, lawsuits, to your point, Nicole, that a poor woman in Detroit, her only recompense or her only defense was a lawsuit. That's an inappropriate use of an older system that was built in the 1700s to try to solve a problem of the 21st century. Now, whether we say we can't release, in fact, in my day job, we actually do that. We actually go through and say, if this has the potential for harm, we're not going to release it. We've even pulled technologies back that we went, oops, excuse me on, which, you know, harm done. The infamous Taybot. But the fact is that we have to be in a position where we as a society agree on what the rules of decency are. And that's where the humanities is absolutely important. It's where you have to teach the engineers that this stuff really, really matters. In fact, the 2 courses I teach at Northwestern, both of them have an ethics component in it. The guy who teaches AI for SPS, he's a close personal friend of mine, he has an ethics component in his program because it's necessary, because otherwise we're teaching the technology in the absence of the framework for it. I think that's incredibly important for us to have. And frankly, you don't get that framework without reading hard crap that nobody understands, which is how I more or less described my entire humanities background when I was a kid. Amanda, you were going to, please forgive me if I just slammed everybody in the audience here.
Perfect full circle moment where you said that it was out of context, because that's exactly what the answers that ChatGPT gives you are.
Yeah. Well, if you're not careful, if you don't ground them appropriately. I mean, in the use in business, we do all kinds of things. We tell everybody, put in all of these constraints. There's something called RAG, which, you know, results augmented generation. What is that? That's basically the technology. It's basically framing the technology so it doesn't screw up and it doesn't give you bad answers. We don't do that to the public. We do that for businesses because businesses actually have that desire not to get screwed up. You're right. The technology is pretty dumb, and it's not going to get smarter anytime soon. It's just really powerful, dumb technology. And that's where we have to create the framework around it. I'm sorry, Amanda, I cut you off. I hope I didn't. Okay.
So we have a few minutes left, and I'm gonna ask one more of our prepared questions, but I'd also like to ask our speakers, if you wish. Our audience has been engaged in a robust question asking in the chat. So if we can briefly tackle the question I'm about to throw out, and then maybe we'll turn to what some of our audience has been thinking and asking about in the chat. So the question is, how do we reconcile the time-saving allure of AI, it's great, with the imperative to preserve our capacity for critical thinking and deep problem solving? And this is in academia, but also in industry, in the sciences and beyond. So is it possible to reconcile these two? You know, AI makes things so easy. Boy, that great question, Bill.
Yeah, just absolutely knocked us over.
We froze. We had an unstable internet connection.
Oh, okay. That's
You
good.
had me the allure of the technology. So this is perhaps if you could sort of come back at the question a little bit better, maybe I can try to.
Sure. I think what chat was asking, right, is that there's this technology makes things easier, but is the cost of us embracing this technology the loss of our capacity for critical thinking? How do we, I mean, I'm an academic, and so I'm always, you know, I perceive myself as a kind of a trickster. My best professors messed with my mind in ways that, you know, led me to unanticipated epiphanies. And I guess is the fear is, as more and more of our students and people, you know, in the field make use of the power of AI, like you're a host using it to rewrite your bios, right? Is something lost in that process? Are we by eliminating the obstacles, are we also eliminating the potential for other future discoveries? Something like that.
Yeah, no, I can jump in there. So I mentioned the AI Equity Lab that we're doing at Brookings. So part of the work that we've been thinking about outside of the non-discriminatory nature, design and implementation of these models is your point of, you know, the extent to which you can use the tool in ways that sort of embolden people to think differently. And I'm a parent, you know, my 17-year-old, my now college graduate, they've been raised on these tools, and they've been raised in ways to use it for, you know, whether it's thinking about the research question that they want to come up with, thinking about a literature they might not have thought of, getting ideas. I mean, contrary to what we all believe in terms of AI, sometimes Copilot is right, you know, or Grammarly when I'm writing something, you know, sometimes it does tell me something different when I'm using Word, and it comes back and say, can I recommend that you think of this way, or have you thought of that? Here's where I would push your question a little bit with regards to students, though. Knowing that this technology, as most technologies historically, have entered our society and disrupted and appended, you know, not just the way in which we organize work and how we think, but it's also appended how we, you know, how we classify and what we expect of people when they are raised in this digital age. It's sort of like, again, the internet is a good example of a disruptive technology and communications that really have forced us to do stuff like this. Here's what I would put on your question, though. In the education space in particular, we do have this perception that critical thinking is the stellar goal for all of our students, which it is, of course. And we also have a perception that most students have to reach that the same way. And what we find with AI, particularly generative AI, there are students who have schools that say that they cannot use this technology, or it places them in the bucket of cheating because they decided to use generative AI to think about a question, but because of the school or the environment of that school, it's actually perceived that they misled the professor or the teacher, and the essay wasn't written by them. I am actually one of those people that thinks that we have to strike a balance, but we as educators have to also come into this with, I think Amanda said it earlier, with our eyes wide open to also not assess the judgment of what we think this technology is and isn't. Students that live in communities of color, for example, are being told that they cannot use generative AI. So when they get to college at a disadvantage in terms of how to leverage that for critical thinking, they may be at a less resource school where they're already dealing with teachers that are not teaching those skills. And then my fear in the K through 20 pipeline, they get to college and they have not seen the technology in action, or they're accused of, because the professor knows their background, of actually misleading in terms of where they fall in the critical inquiry space. For me, your question is hard to answer without, and I'm a sociologist, and now you all know where I come from on this, without having the backdrop of our structural constraints and power conversation, which I think lends itself to this new tool. When I first found out about generative AI, I'll just say this real quickly, I actually thought it was an elitist manufacturer of AI on the language side. And my immediate reaction to Sam Altman, because he came to DC and he was talking about the tool a couple of years ago, is I asked him the extent to which the generative AI identifies people who have accents, are regionally dispersed, use some type of slang. You know, I'm born from New York, but when I got to Chicago, everybody said I'm fitting to go to the store. I didn't know what they were talking about. I said sneaker, they said a gym shoe. And one of the answers that came back in that early version of ChatGPT was, we never thought about that. And so my point is, we have to be very careful of also, and I think Amanda said it so nicely, giving agency to the technology to define what we mean by critical thinking skills, if that makes sense. Because at the end of the day, all of these technologies are still embedded around a framework of power. And the extent to which that power shows up in the technology, no matter how efficient it is, it still is going to find ways in which it fits within our structural values and norms of inequality. So I'll leave right there.
Yeah, Amanda, you want to take on for?
Well, I mean, sure. As an instructor, and I teach just college students and primarily graduate students now. And so if someone is the time-saving allure, right, of AI, there are many ways to save time if that's your goal. For one of my assignments, for example, and so if you are trying to, students who pay other people to write their essays, students who all the other things, sure, AI is a bit different in kind, but if your goal is to get through my class and save time, then I'm not doing my job. And so my job is to provoke students to want to spend time thinking critically and having fun with big problems, knowing that it's a safe place to do so. They get to grade themselves, so there's no risk. Wow. I am seeing double.
That's strange.
Oh, and I'm paused on it. I'm very animated there. Okay, so the other thing is that I think the more that, gosh, I was shocked by my own face. the more that I use the tools, and the more that I see others doing them, is using the general versions and not the RAG, the RIG, that, it's a little bit different way of using them, is that they flatten everything entirely. And so everything sounds similar. I can now kind of pick up on when something has been written by ChatGPT, and even just to be cheeky, the questions that you sent to us written by ChatGPT, I put them into ChatGPT and said, how would you answer this? And it answered them. And I said, pretend you're a professor with a background in media studies, and this is, you're addressing an interdisciplinary diverse group of people at a Friday night event. And it gave me answers that were so boring as to be meaningless. And I said, those feel lifeless. And it said, oh, I'm sorry. And it added a bunch of exclamations, and it said, it uses absolutely, and this is going to be game changing. And it started using words it associated with not being lifeless. And that it interpreted the opposite of lifeless to be overly enthusiastic and lots of exclamation points. Again, just like put makeup on a flattened thing, and now it was just ridiculous answers. And so I think that, again, if your goal in a learning space is to save time, I'm not doing my job as an instructor.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we had this debate at Northwestern, and I am so far to the edge of that as an adjunct over there. But the debate was whether we should allow the use of generative AI in the classroom, because God forbid you could just take the questions we're asking and just run it through, generative AI, ChatGPT, Bing Chat, or whatever at the time, and get the questions answered. And the general conclusion was, everybody can give you the answer to the question just looking at ChatGPT, then you're asking the wrong question. And we're at the point where this technology enables us to go to the higher level. I think, Nicole, that you mentioned this as well. Let me pull it back to a little on historical construct, if I can, and I know we're running a little over time. The people who transferred knowledge before Gutenberg were the scriveners. The height of knowledge was transferred by the use of these fabulous people, monks sitting in monasteries scribbling things in the Western world. Forgive me, I'm sticking in Europe for the moment. When the printing press came around, we didn't need that function anymore. Did we lose our intelligence because we now had something that was easier? No, it enabled us to write a whole lot more books, to bring a whole lot more information to the world. It enabled us to go up a level instead of just relying on information shared by an incredibly thin number of people. In fact, controlled entirely by a handful of people who were absolutely convinced that they were right with respect to morality, the view of the world, and so on. And what the printing press did is it changed the game on how we're going to do it, on how we pass knowledge, but also how we gain knowledge, because it enabled us to ask harder, higher questions. Genuinely, and I admit I'm an optimist here, I think we're at that same kind of pivot point, because we're in the academic world worried, can students use generative AI to write their homework? Amanda, I agree. If all they're doing is to getting more efficient, it's not really good homework. If it's something that critically pushes their mindset so that they can draw insight rather than knowledge, then we're in the right spot. And I think that's where we see the technology going. It's enabling us to ask harder questions, where the next generation and the one after that will be a whole lot smarter than we are, and a whole lot more impactful than we are, at least in my opinion.
All right, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I'm gonna leave it open to our three speakers to close the show, either by referencing something you saw in the questions from our audience. I want to apologize to our audience for not having the time to take questions in real time. My apologies. And I want to thank all of you for coming. But before I say goodbye, I want to turn it over back to
Turn it back over to us for sort of parting words, if we will.
Yeah, parting words.
So I want to part with Nicole's got a book coming out, and
oh my God,
it's really kind of useful. But this is the right conversation for us to be having at this moment in time, and I think that's really critical. When we did the last technology in the last age, the third industrial age was the information age, we didn't ask any of these questions. What we ended up with was what we called the digital divide. We ended up creating the knowledge divide. If we don't ask these questions now, we're going to deepen that divide. I guess, Nicole, I haven't seen your book yet, but I'm guessing that's kind of what you're saying. And from that perspective, it is incumbent on us to get at that. I think Thor said something about talking about the need for humanities in his question about, how did you put it? And I'm trying to scroll up, and Zoom and I have never been good friends. What among the market values do we choose? Answer, I don't know. But it's incumbent on us to bring the right people to the table. That is humanities people. That is people involved in religion. That is people involved in philosophy. It is also the technologists, because the technologists are not evil people sinisterly going after the world. They're actually trying to make their world and the worlds around them better typically. There are bad guys out there for certain, but our ability to sort of create and bridge the divide between what we can do and what we should do is something I think really, really important for us to go address in the next and the next and the next in our academic world. I'll shut up from there and say thank you very, very much for the chance to chat with you all.
Thank you, Jim.
And I'll go next. And I was.
Are you sure you don't want to end it out?
Okay, I can end it. Go ahead. I'll go
Oh,
last.
we got to end with you.
I'll
Put
go
that mic
last.
back up. So I've already said it twice, but I'll say it again, that I continue to see the interdisciplinary humanities, the liberal studies, the graduate liberal studies. If you're teaching this, if you're a student in the room and you're taking these classes, please keep doing that, because when you're able to be at the table and understand a little bit about the ways that the technology is working, a little bit about the language that people are using and how it's rooted in histories itself, a bit about the way that data is working, a bit about the way that you can think about the interconnected nature of technologies, humans, the environment, power, all of that. I think it's really important work. Not in all cases, of course, but something that I see in my daily work all the time is if I have public policy majors who then go into public policy, who stay in public policy, or attorneys who started in the law and continued with the law, or technologists who started with tech and continued in tech, then the problems they see and the solutions they see are within those very specific lines of sight, which is great. And we all need to be at the table. This is why it's really important to have all the people at the table, because if we have each person very focused on their lane, that makes a really important conversation. Also, those of us from interdisciplinary humanities background are able to say that words that you're using are grounded in exploitation, and the data that you're using has been pulled from archives that were curated by librarians who only kept white folks stuff, right? And so I think it's really important to have all of that at the table. And I think we are the ones who are able to assess the claims being made by organizations, the claims being made by people who are playing with the tools, and understanding those claims allows us to intervene in places like policy and places like funding. I'm seeing things that should never be funded being funded because someone told a good story, it was convincing. And if the folks with the money may not understand what they're buying. And so I just, and then we continue the digital divide because there are inequities in access and accessibility and broadband, and not to mention for disabled folks and all kinds of things, which I think leads us into Nicol's book.
Yes, I know you guys are giving me so much love. Thank you. The book comes out Tuesday. Pre-order now, but it does officially release on Tuesday. So it's been quite surreal, just the whole experience. But I guess I'll leave you with these words. I mean, for the people, and I saw in the chat, for someone who is struggling, who is in the humanities, to participate in this space, what I would just suggest to you is look at me. It was not always easy to sit at the table, one, because as a woman, as a Black woman at that, but I call many folks that are on this call that want to partake in this space, I call us hidden figures, because really, if we were unhidden, we might be able to avert some of the dangers. And that came to me from watching the story of Katherine Johnson, who was the one that averted a lot of disasters in space, but no one knew about her until she was about 96. And at that time, 4 years later, she passed away, but she was really the hidden figure for why we didn't see a lot of humanity destroyed in trying to be experimenting for space missions. We need to uncover a lot of those unhidden figures, and we need those hidden figures to be at the table. So for any student who feels like, well, I can't get a seat, I'm struggling, you don't have to struggle. All you have to do is wake up every day and intuitively, from the methodology in which you come from, think about ways in which you can interrogate this technology. You know, at the end of the day, I think we all struggle with this question of, and I think Bill says it so well, this is probably where I spent about 35% of my time with legislators, sort of unpacking efficiency from the human deliverable. And most folks like to err on the side of efficiency because guess what? Lawyers are using it, researchers are using it, doctors are using it. Occupationally, technology is shifting in ways that we've never seen it rechange or change up the narrative in other occupations before. The challenge here, however, is that these products are being built for us and not by us. And if you are not, as my grandmother would say, in the kitchen cooking the greens, you're actually on the menu because at the end of the day, you had nothing to do with the ingredient. And so, you know, part of the work that I think all of us on this call need to do, if you're in school, if you're out of school, question the technologies that come before you and engage in what I call a movement towards media literacy that allows us to ripple through academia where we're actually imparting these principles throughout the life cycle of learning. But most importantly, as a person who's out of school, question the things that are presented before you. Because when you question those things, you're less likely to be relying on those things. And in some cases, you might actually rebel because guess what? We as humans have the discernment of when things are not right for us. So I would just land it there. I mean, please stay in touch with me, read the book, but most importantly, you know, for the students, I cannot tell you enough. I'm a true sociologist. You tell me my training is sociology, but I'm a practicing sociologist in technology. And, you know, I may not know how to build a model. And honestly, somebody asked me if I was ever going to go back to school. And I said, no. I said, I think I have enough education at this point in my life. And I'm paying for other people's education. So I don't want to pay another thing for me. But my point is, but I actually do know somebody who went back to school to get a data science degree. I'm not going to kid you at 55. But my point is, you can learn these things, but there's no magic sauce that does not stop you from applying what you know about the technology that's before you. And so just keep that in mind. Next time you go to the airport, you can submit your face for a scan or you can say no. And you can go the old-fashioned way and show them your license. The trade-off technology may be so great, but the people who are interrogating it have to be greater. So I'll leave it like that. So stay in touch.
On behalf of AGLSP, I want to thank Amanda, Jim, and Nicole for teaching us so much this evening, this afternoon. I want to thank all of the graduate liberal studies programs that sponsored today's event, including San Diego State University, Northwestern, and Duke universities. And on behalf of our sponsors and AGLSP, I want to thank you and have a very good night. Thank you.